just gonna put my foot on the floor and I'm not lifting till I see God or a checkered flag.
Hello, welcome back to Racing Thoughts, an IndyCar podcast. I'm Megan Dennis.
And I'm Meg Taylor.
And we are back today continuing our countdown to the season start. At time of recording, we are 3 weeks out.
We are so close, guys. So close to cars on track. It is insane.
And following along with the last two episodes, we had our brief deep dive into history. Meg has covered our specs and regs and regulations last week. And so now we are here to really kick you off into what to expect when it comes to drivers and teams for the 2025 grid. Buckle up, get your snacks ready. This may be a long one because we got 11 teams this year and 27 drivers. So good chunk of things to cover. I guess going from there, we'll kick it off with our newest entry to the grid with Prema Racing. Meg, take it away.
Yeah. So Prima is brand new to the grid this year, and it is historically known as a European racing team. It is based in Italy, but they bought an old Andretti HQ for IndyCar. Like I said, it's mostly known for European racing, so you'll find that Prima is mostly within like F4 through F2, and there's a lot of really well-known F1 drivers who have been through Prima. Both drivers are previous Prima drivers who have come back to race for IndyCar. Prima is a Chevy engine team. With their drivers, first up, we have in the number 90 car, Callum Ilott. He is 26 years old from England. This is his third year in IndyCar, and he debuted in the last three races of the 2021 season. He previously drove for JHR. There was a whole debacle with that seat getting ousted and everything. But he also did do a very brief stint in Arrow McLaren for the number 6 during the 2024 season. That's a whole saga in and of itself that we'll touch upon when we talk about Arrow McLaren later on. And overall, he's had 38 races over the past 4 years that he has been in IndyCar. He also races hypercars for Joda in WEC. So if you ever want to see him do that, I think he's pretty fantastic there. So that's Callum Ilott. Next up, we are going into the number 83 car with Robert Schwartzman. So he's 25 years old, Russian-Israeli driver. It is going to be his first year in IndyCar, which is very exciting. So one of our rookies this year. Prima driver, FDA, so Ferrari Driver Academy, went through all of that, and he is a Ferrari reserve driver as well. He was the F3 champion and was an F2 runner-up in 2021, which is really cool. And that's really kind of all I got for Prima. They're so new, and with Callum and Robert being both previous Prima drivers, that's really all we've got. I will say, as like a personal little tidbit, Prima drivers within like F4, F3, F2, they are historically known for their socials content. Like Prima does a very, very good job with like their Instagrams and their YouTube videos. They're all very silly, goofy. But one thing that's very notable about all of that is the media training that happens with Prima drivers because of all of these things. So I think they're very fun to watch. I'm excited that Prima's here, so yay for our new team.
Yeah, I think they'll be interesting to watch. I think you talking about their social media things an interesting note too, because we're already kind of seeing that. I do think it's going to be interesting to see how that translates into an American audience going forward, because it does have that kind of standard Prima feel, which is very European kind of in nature. So I do think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of market they fill coming into IndyCar.
For sure. But I think that's kind of where they might stand out with it, is because their socials and their media is kind of targeted towards like a younger audience, just in terms of how chronically online a lot of their videos and their challenges are. And that gets a lot of excitement from an audience that previously I don't think really cares, because it shows driver personalities. And I think that's why so many of these well-known Prima drivers like Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, both of them were Prima drivers, and look at how successful they are in F1 and how well loved they are as a personality. Whereas, some other feeder series teams, don't necessarily do the weird, goofy social content that Prima does. And now that doesn't necessarily translate well with an audience. So I have a feeling that that social presence is going to do very well for them, finding a niche market in the States. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Moving on to our second team, Ed Carpenter Racing. We touched on them kind of in our first episode back this year on everything that's kind of happening with them and going on with their kind of whole rebranding, remarketing, coming in with the Java House Splenda Heartland Group and Tim Gevlov. Tim Gevlov, the Splenda man. I now actually have his name. Everyone clap. But we're talking historically from Ed Carpenter. So they've been as a team under the Ed Carpenter name in some sort of form since 2012. They were originally Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing. They combined together. And then 2016, 2017-ish is when the point that Sarah Fisher ended up getting out of racing and Ed Carpenter and his behind-the-scenes sponsors kind of took over everything, kind of as ECR that we know today. They've had a lot of drivers that you've probably heard of in more recent years drive for them at some point. This includes like Joseph Newgarden as a rookie drove under the ECR, greater umbrella. Connor Daly drove for them. That didn't end well, but we're not going to spend too much time on that. Danica Patrick, rookie debut, was with them. Ryan Hunter-Reay was with them for a while. Historically, Rinus VeeKay has been with them for the last 5 years up until everything that happened. And we've already touched on that, so we won't spend time. Similarly to Prima, another car with a Chevy engine, so part of that whole Chevy Honda split. If you're new to it, we talked about that before. Meg talked on it last episode, but that is a big thing to take note of on which team's driving under that. They, I guess, technically have 3 drivers, but one of them is just Ed Carpenter himself for the 500. We have a few teams that do have their 500 drivers already announced, but we're not going to talk on that until we get closer till May because you're not going to see them day in, day out in the 27. As far as ECR goes with their 2 drivers, this year they have Christian Rasmussen in the 21 returning to ECR for his second year in the series. So 24 years old, Danish driver. He was in his rookie season, but did not do the full rookie season. He's been in the U.S. for a long time, though, and is actually a notable Indy Next alum. So he's really been a testament to the U.S. ladder system and the way that's been able to benefit getting drivers into IndyCar. With that, we saw at the end of last year, he took over for Ed Carpenter. You can go back in the last season, we talked on that a lot and how whether or not that was a good move, and it turned out to actually be a really good move for the team. Also, check out Christian's TikToks as of late. If you have not seen them, this is absolutely hilarious. He's completely dogging on his teammate in the most fun, hilarious, goofy way. So, gotta touch on that. And then speaking of said teammate, in the number 20 car in his first year with Ed Carpenter, but his 10th in the series, you have 33-year-old Alexander Rossi, American-born from California, but he came to IndyCar from F1. And we got him from the Manor system. That didn't work out for him to be able to stay in F1, so he came back to IndyCar. With that, over the last 9 years, he's ran in 147 races with 8 wins, 30 podiums, and 7 pole positions. Came to IndyCar in 2016 with Andretti, was there until 2022. Did a lot with that. His first season with the team, he won the Indy 500 in his 100th running as a rookie, which is crazy. We love Rossi. We haven't hid that at any point in time. So I don't know if it's worth continuing to deep dive on that, but we adore him. And I'm excited to see what it looks like for Alex this year moving into a team that now has the sponsorship money, and you can tell he maybe is feeling a lot more comfortable than he has the last couple years at McLaren.
Yeah, 100%. The only other thing that I will add, and this is a personal tidbit. So while he is from California, for some reason, he is a major Patriots fan and he loves Tom Brady. And as a Boston girly who has a deep love for Tom Brady, it's everything to me. So that's the only thing that I will need to add onto the Alexander Rossi train. So
I put that note in there for you. Also, do you want to know the story of why he's a Pats fan?
Please, I'm begging.
So he grew up a 49ers fan, being in California, makes sense. But when he was in Europe, the only games he could get were the Patriots games. And so being there for like 6 years, he ended up becoming a Patriots fan and is a huge Tom Brady fan. So like he kind of supported the Bucks more than the Patriots when Tom Brady went to the Bucks, and now like he really kind of considers himself more a Colts fan just because
Which
he
is
does live in
totally
Indianapolis.
Totally fair. But I mean, like, it's not surprising that he ended up a Patriots fan if that was like the only football that he was able to watch while abroad in Europe. Because you think about the time when he was abroad, that is like peak Tom Brady dynasty era. So it's just like, okay, here we go. As if I didn't need another reason to love Rossi enough. Him and I, we can bond. We can be besties over our love of Tom Brady. So
Alexander Rossi, you're welcome on the podcast at any time.
listen, dude, we can talk Tom Brady all day long. I will happily indulge.
Okay, going on to our next team is Dale Coyne Racing. So Dale Coyne Racing has been in the series since 1984. If you go back to our history episode, you heard me mention them. They kind of fell on the kart side of the split, so that's kind of an interesting thing of note. Just kind of the generalness. Again, if you're interested in that, go back a couple episodes. We talked about that. They are a Honda engine team, so they're first of our Honda engines that we are going to talk about. Notable drivers, and a lot of them in their rookie season included Paul Tracy, Sebastian Bourdais was with them, Connor Daly was there for his rookie season, Santino Ferrucci was there for his rookie season, Alex Palou was there as a rookie, David Lucas as a rookie, Stingray Robb as a rookie. Rookie.
I was gonna say something, but you were kind of on a roll.
Anyways,
Anyway, going back, it's pronounced rookie.
it is pronounced rookie. Got it. We got there. Anyways, yeah, a lot of notable drivers. Another one is Jack Harvey. You are going to hear us mention Jack Harvey many, many times with many, many teams throughout this, which I think is very interesting just in general, especially, and is also a testament for someone who doesn't have a seat this year, what that looks like. Also, Nolan Siegel technically debuted with DCR as a rookie in the 500 this year. We'll talk about Nolan more when we talk to Arrow later on. So, as far as this 2025 season goes, we only have one driver of their two in the lineup. Is this shocking? No, actually, it's more shocking that here we are 3 weeks out from St. Pete and we actually have a Dale Coyne Racing driver. It's been the first time in a very long time that we've been able to have that. So that would be in the 51 car, Jacob Abel. So he's one of our three rookies. Second one we have mentioned today, 23 years old from Louisville, Kentucky. Honestly, if you don't know a lot about Jacob Abel, I am going to plug our podcast buddies off track. They did an interview with him last week, I think, or last week at the point of recording, which I guess would be beginning of February when you were listening. But it's actually a really interesting breakdown on kind of his story and everything. He, up until this year, has always raced with Abel Motorsports, so it's always been with his family team. He spent the last 3 years in Indy Next, and I believe, Meg, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he came up second in Indy Next last year as far as finish goes. But it's an interesting one. I think it'll be interesting to watch if you look at the other people that he kind of raced with. So he's with, Kyle Kirkwood growing up, Oliver Askew growing up. He's raced with Stingray Robb. He's raced with a bunch of the guys that are currently on the grid and have been there for a little bit longer. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, to kind of paraphrase what he was talking about, how he felt like the need was to take his time to make sure he was ready before jumping in too soon. I don't know. I guess there's a lot of nuance that could be behind that, but I think that's interesting, and he'll be interesting to see what happens with Dale Coyne and a team that is usually typically underfunded. That we see that people are there for a year. This includes both drivers and parts of their staff. They get their start and then they go on to bigger and better. And then with that, number 18, we don't know. Hopefully by the time y'all are listening to this, y'all know. But as of 1 p.m. Eastern time on February 9th, we do not have any idea who is driving in the 18. I would assume it's probably going to be Renus VK, but that is just as much speculation as anything else, and I won't be shocked if we see several different drivers throughout the year.
Yeah, very true. I mean, well, we can only limit, 3 drivers per seat. And that was a new rule that has been introduced for this year as a result of Dale Coyne last year rotating their seats, the last several years, yeah, but rotating their drivers constantly. It's literally like the Dale Coyne rule, which is hilarious. So who knows who's going to get the seat? And honestly, who knows for how long? Because it's at this point, it's really just all going to be about sponsorship for the team and who is actually able to provide for all of that, Yeah. So we'll see.
I think also, again, we'll touch on that once we know something and it gets closer to May, but I won't be shocked if you see Catherine Legg at least doing a 500 car with somebody. Yeah. And since she raced with Dale Coyne last year, I could see maybe that partnership happening again, because we do know that Elf is planning on running the 500 car again, as long as they can get that spot in the 33. Yeah. But that's a problem for May. We'll have plenty of May stuff to talk about.
Yes, we will have so much to talk about in May. But anyways, moving on.
Moving on to Juncos Hollinger Racing. Maybe I said that right. I don't know. I call it JHR for a reason. So with this, they debuted at the 500 in 2017. They're another one of our Chevy powered cars. They did start as an previously Indy Lights team before making the jump into the full IndyCar series. They returned full-time to the grid in 2021 fully returned to the grid in 21 at the 500 with a partnership with Penske, and then were able to run 3 more races at the end of the year, seeing Callum Ilott come into IndyCar for the first time. With this, they bought out Carlin Racing at the end of the 2021 season, so bought all their cars and everything, were able to get full-time seats in the series into 2022, where we saw Callum Ilott get his first full season in an IndyCar, along with Santino Ferrucci going from Dale Coyne to JHR for that season. 2023 saw Santino Ferrucci leave and go to AJ Foyt, and so with that brought in Agustin Canapino. We have talked about Agustin Canapino previously, so you can go back to later episodes in season 1 from last year where we talked about kind of what led to him being ousted from his seat. But the short version of it is it really came down to there was a lack of funding and a lot of not great fan interactions online that were being endorsed a little too heavily from him and his camp that did see him sitting out a race, which actually led to Nolan Siegel. Again, you're going to hear us mention Nolan. He popped up a lot last year very randomly before becoming a little bit more permanent in the random, but Nolan filled in for him at Detroit last year. And then after that, Canapino was back for a couple races. It saw then Connor Daly come in to finish out the year just because they needed the chance to secure that leader circle. And Canapino also didn't have the funds, so it kind of benefited everybody. Connor Daly was able to help them secure that last spot in the leader circle, which really benefits them as a team. So speaking of that, and going forward into this 2025 season, in the number 77 car, we do have Connor Daly staying with JHR. So Connor Daly is 33 years old. He is an Indianapolis native. His stepdad is actually the president of IMS, so Connor Daly very much has big ties to this series. He loves and cares about this series immensely. In 151 starts, he's had 2 podiums and 1 pole, one of those podiums coming last year at Milwaukee. He and Joseph Newgarden have been friends since childhood. The first time Joseph Newgarden ever got in a kart was one of Connor's, so they grew up really close together. He lived with James Hinchcliffe and Alexander Rossi in 2016, and then Rossi and Connor lived together for a while after. Connor has been in the series for a very, very long time, so he is going into his 12th season, but with that, he has not had a lot of full seasons during that 12 years. He's run a bunch of partials. He's really only had 3 full seasons. And so I'm very excited for the fact that he is finally getting this full-time seat. He's worked very hard, and similarly to Jack Harvey, when we're going to mention a bunch of different drivers and teams and you're going to keep seeing names pop up, Connor's one of those names that he's done what he can to make sure he still has a place. With that, he also is a fellow podcaster with the Speed Street podcast. If you want to hear Connor's thoughts and opinions, that's where you go because he has no shortage of sharing them. But I don't know, I personally am very excited for him to be back on the grid this year in a full-time capacity. I think, some people will look at him and say, oh, his stepdad's the president of IMS. He's probably had this whole career handed to him. But that's clearly not the case when you look at the trajectory and how hard he's clearly had to work to stay in this sport. So exciting for him to be back. Also, he has diabetes, which is, cool's not the right word, but that's interesting of that, he's able to race having type 1 diabetes. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, switching gears to Connor's teammate, who he's notably not been the biggest fan of, so I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch this year. In the 78 car, you have Stingray Robb. So Stingray is 23 years old. He is from Idaho. He just got married in September, so congratulations to Stingray. He is starting his 3rd season in the sport. The last 2 have been with Dale Coyne Racing. He, for better or worse, sometimes gets a bad rep of he is a pay driver. He doesn't necessarily hide it, and it's well known that, his family and the connection he has is able to help fund him a seat. And with that too, he actually went on Connor's podcast a couple weeks ago. Again, gonna plug this. It was an interesting thing to be able to listen to, where Stingray kind of acknowledges that it takes him longer than he wishes it does, and a lot of times in comparison to his teammates, to be able to get comfortable in cars. And so now that he's in his 3rd season, he's really thinking that this is going to give him a better chance to prove himself because he's going to have time to understand what does it look like to be an IndyCar driver. Also, big Jesus man, he drove the Praymobile last year. Yeah, That's Stingray.
I think it's really interesting. And I know we've like talked about this on the podcast before about like how paid drivers are seen very differently within IndyCar versus other like motorsport series, but like more specifically within F1. So, yes, there is some sort of negative connotation that comes with being a quote unquote paid driver. But I think within IndyCar, because of just how funding functions, being a paid driver isn't necessarily seen as, at least from a fan perspective, as like as bad as it is in like F1, let's say. You know, like in F1, if you hear like, oh, someone's a paid driver, it's fully just because that they have the funds to be there, that they are there. And oftentimes you do see that there is like a skill difference, but I don't really feel that, again, on the fan perspective of like, I don't see that being a skill difference or anything that's like hugely different between being a paid driver versus not, in IndyCar at least. I think it's an interesting little tidbit that's there.
Yeah. I think it's also just the reality of how expensive it is to run these cars. Like,
Yeah.
especially for the smaller teams who it's like they don't have those big name sponsorships, and especially not if you're comparing it to F1, where
Yeah.
it's like, you know, up until this year with Splenda and Chili's, we'll talk about the Chili's mobile in a minute, but being, you know, kind of household notable names, it's been probably since Scott Dixon ran the Target livery that we've had big kind of tangible brands in the sport. So
Yeah.
like if you take Connor Daly's number that he gave us, and I appreciate that Connor Daly gave us this number, that, you know, he said it's $10 million to run a season versus when he first got into the sport, it was maybe $1 million, maybe two, if you were really trying to get somewhere. That's a big jump to be able to have that funding, especially for the smaller teams who can't bring it with them. So it's like they got to get drivers in there who can help bring
Yeah.
that funding too.
Yeah, 100%. So, not necessarily the negative connotation that being a paid driver is like in F1 as IndyCar. So, it's all about perspective and transparency. And I think IndyCar does a pretty good job with that. So, overall. Anyways, moving on to our next team, we have Chip Ganassi Racing, also known as CGR. They have been around IndyCar for a long time. They've been around in IndyCar since 1990, and they have a total of 21 championships. And so there's IndyCar has a total of 21 championships between Champ Car, which has 4 championships, IndyCar has 12, and then there's 5, but overall they have 5 Indy 500 wins. They have a new technical partnership this year with Meyer Shank, which we're going to talk about in a little bit as well. So basically just a technical alliance allows them to share resources and expertise to improve team performances. So for example, they are able to share technical support, so like dampers, the chassis builds, and setup information. They're able to share crew and engineering staff, commercial and marketing stuff, and just do combined track work. So basically it allows a lot of information to be shared between both teams. We have a lot of notable drivers who have been in CGR. So first and foremost, we have the namesake, Chip Ganassi, Michael Andretti, Brian Herta. We have Scott Dixon, obviously. We have Graham Rahal, Tony Kanaan, Felix Rosenquist, Marcus Ericsson, Marcus Armstrong, Linus Lundqvist. There's a laundry list of drivers who have been with this team. And, you know, that's kind of to be expected when you've been around for as long as they have. So we love that. They are also going to be returning to Indy Next this year as well. So the feeder series. And I think that's going to be really interesting to watch and kind of build up the feeder series a little bit more. Like we've been seeing increase of drivers coming through the feeder series as well. And when you have big names like CGR coming in as like teams and sponsors of these young drivers, I think that really puts in a lot of like dedication into building it up as a feeder series, you know, instead of trying to pull from the European circuits and instead of trying to pull from other racing series, you're really trying to form these drivers into being what the series really needs in their drivers. And like if you have the junior drivers coming up, there's going to be less kind of acclimation time. There's going to be less with all of that. So excited to see them returning to Indy next. So going into their current driver lineup, CGR historically has had many drivers, and last year they had 5 in their lineup. And with the whole charter system, one of the big things was, all right, well, who's going to be in these seats? Because you have to go from 5 to 3. So starting off in the number 8, we have Kiffin Simpson. He is 20 years old from the Cayman Islands. This is going to be his second season in IndyCar. He comes from a lot of money, which again, we've mentioned this, it's not a bad thing, and brings a lot of sponsorship money to the team, which makes sense as to why he was one of the ones that got put into that 3rd seat. Next up in the number 9, we have the IndyCar GOAT, in my opinion. It is Scott Dixon. He is IndyCar's Iceman, as his nickname, and he's 44 years old from New Zealand. He is a dad of 3, and his wife, Emma, I did a little bit of research on her. She is so cool. I'm obsessed with her.
So cool.
She's so cool. I want to just like talk to her. I'm like, oh my God, I'm in awe of her. So she is a Welsh and British running Olympian, and like IndyCar did a whole like article on them a couple of years ago, but there was one quote that I thought was so funny, and I'm like, this is what made me obsessed with her. And it was a quote from Scott himself, and he goes, "We're polar opposites," Scott once told a reporter, "and opposites attract." Quote, "She would happily talk to a brick wall and have a nice conversation," he said, adding, "I would be the brick wall." And I'm like, I think that is so cute and funny, and like I think they're fantastic. So shout out to Emma Dixon. I want to hang out, that's all. But Scott Dixon, like I said, he is the GOAT for a reason. He is going into his 23rd season. That's insane. And he's still producing phenomenal results, and is still like, he has the performance to back up his name. He's got 6 championships to his name, which is second only to AJ Foyt. And in the 2024 season, he ran the most laps of any driver. So that shows to his consistency, maybe. Yes, no?
I'm going to make a caveat. I worded that really weird. As of 2024, he has led the most laps out of any driver in IndyCar history.
Yo. Okay. Anyways, he has, oh my God, these numbers are crazy. He has 57 wins, 140 podiums, and 32 poles. Like, he's fantastic. So, Scott Dixon, you are the Iceman. You are the GOAT. Can't wait to continue to see what you produce. And then finally for CGR, in the number 10 car, we have the reigning champion in Alex Palou. He is 27 years old. He is Spanish, and he, like I said, is the reigning champion from IndyCar. He's had 3 championships in total, and his name has come with a little bit of, I don't want to say controversy, but it is. It kind of is. So back in 2022, there was a controversy that happened between Alex Palou, McLaren, and CGR. Basically, quick rundown of what happened is that Palou had signed to join McLaren in 2023, and he breached his CGR contract. And McLaren is basically taking him to court, seeking at least $30 million in damages and sponsorships that McLaren had lost. And there's been a lot of back and forth over the past couple of years, and one of the things that has come out of the Palou camp is that he accepts that he had breached his contract, but what his lawyers and what his camp are saying is like they don't necessarily agree with the amount of money that McLaren is trying to get from him. So they were back in court as of last week, so early February at the time of recording. So back in early February, it's still ongoing as of right now, and I don't foresee this really kind of being settled easily or, within a certain time frame. I have a feeling this might drag on for a little while longer, and who knows what the end result is going to be. From there, this is Palou's 6th season. So he debuted in 2020 with DCR, and he is one of the people who has a commercial with Fox that is running on TV. It's very funny. I enjoy it. So keep an eye out if you're watching Fox at all for his commercial.
I do want to go point out one thing about Kiffin. Follow him on Twitter because he's hilarious and I enjoy him a lot.
Aren't you friends with Kiffin on LinkedIn?
I am friends with him on LinkedIn. I like Kiffin. Seems like a good kid.
You know what? He's young. He's funny.
All right. Meg, tell us about their technical partners in Meyer Shank Racing.
Okay, so Meyer Shank debuted in the 500 with one car in 2017. They tried to debut in 2013, but they sold that car to Sam Schmidt Motorsports, which is now Arrow McLaren. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But in 2018, they ran a 6-race entry with Jack Harvey. 2019, 10 races, and in 2021, Helio Castroneves won his 4th Indy 500 with them and the Andretti Technical Alliance. So they have some notable history to their name. Some drivers that might be of interest, we have Jack Harvey, Helio Castroneves, Simon Pagenaud, Connor Daly, Tom Blomqvist, and David Malukas. So, like I said before, they have their technical alliance with CGR, and I don't know the extent of what CGR is going to be giving and providing to Meyer Shank, but I don't know. I have hopes considering how successful Meyer Shank has been just with being consistent, but I think with CGR being their technical alliance, it's just going to get infinitely better. But then you also have a really strong driver pairing, which I'm so excited about. So in the number 60 car, we have Felix Rosenqvist. So I lovingly call him Fro. Everyone does. He's fantastic. He's 33 years old from Sweden. He got married in September and they are just so stinking cute. This is his 7th year in IndyCar and he was formerly with Chip Ganassi in 2019 where he won Rookie of the Year, but he was also a former Arrow McLaren driver, which is kind of how I was introduced to him. And he was also actually a Prima driver in the feeder series. But Felix is a really strong driver. I think he makes a lot of good, smart racing choices. And I feel like he hadn't had an opportunity really last year to kind of show what he was capable of. But I think with CGR being with a technical alliance with MSR, I think he's going to have a lot more kind of at his disposal and really kind of amp up his performance. And then you also have his teammate who's going to be Marcus Armstrong. He's 24 years old from New Zealand. He went through the European feeder series, so he was a Prima driver and he actually lived with Callum Ilott, which is a fun fact. He is also a podcast host for the Screaming Meals, and yep, it's an interesting one. It showcases his personality very well, and I think that brings people in and makes people care about them. Like I said when I was talking about Prima, personality is kind of everything in these series. So Marcus was originally on Chip Ganassi in one of their 5 cars, and he got pushed to Meyer Shank, which some people did not like whatsoever, but I think, again, it's pretty fair. But he was the 2023 Rookie of the Year on the road and street courses only, so he did not do any ovals his rookie season, and last year, 2024, was his first full season, and he had some bad luck on ovals last year, so I am really interested to see kind of what he has done in the off season to get better and not make any mistakes, or kind of just learning how to drive on ovals, because it is a very different experience, especially coming from the European circuits where they don't have ovals. So really learning how to do it, massive learning curve. I'm excited to see what he is able to produce. So that's Meyer Shank.
I want to go back to talking about that technical alliance they have with CGR, because I have spent too much time watching every single driver's pressers from Media Day, and I think Fro had some interesting stuff he was talking about on how, in comparison to Andretti and their technical alliance, or even if you take Penske and AJ Foyt, where it's kind of yeah, we share resources but we don't interact with each other. Scott Dixon addressed this too. This is very much, and Scott was really the one talking about this because the man's been doing this for a long time, it's very much they see each other all as one team, as opposed to 2 different teams working together. And so Fro's engineer for this year is the one that Scott Dixon has had in years. And I think that's going to be very interesting to kind of watch and see what this looks like if essentially you're running a 5-car program under 2 teams. And I think that's going to be the potential to be really positive, but I think could also maybe run the risk of going sideways too. Another thing Fro was talking about too of like how, I mean, the last couple of years, like he's qualified really well. Last year, he qualified so well and then had nothing to show from it with the race. And then kind of the reverse with CGR, and that they didn't really qualify well last year, but then had the race pace. And so that's one thing they're all talking about, how like they really think they're going to be able to pull both strengths and potentially really be something to watch coming into 2025.
For sure. And like I mentioned when I was talking about what technical alliances can share, like they can share crew and engineers and personnel, but usually what happens with those technical alliances is you get really young but promising personnel in the smaller team, and they basically like spend their time developing and getting better so that the bigger team is able to pull them when they're ready and they're fully developed into the bigger team to kind of be those people. Whereas this really feels like it's just kind of both sides are benefiting from personnel. So it feels a lot more equitable in terms of what they are both getting out of it. But I do think you're right. This could potentially run into issues of, all right, well, who's going to get priority in races depending on performance? Like, are we going based off of qualifying, or are we going based off of race pace, or are things going to change in a split second? Like, total F1 reference here, but are we going to get papaya rules in the middle of in an IndyCar race between CGR and Meyer Shank? I'm like, I don't know. So it's going to be very interesting to see. And I think there does need to be a hierarchy, but I don't know if that's been determined, or I don't know how that's going to play out in reality. So it's going to be one to watch, and I'm very excited to see what happens.
All right, so getting into the back half, we told y'all it's going to be a long one. We got a bunch of teams, a bunch of drivers. Moving into Team Penske, you talked about Chip Ganassi being around for a long time. This is the epitome of around for a long time. You name a North American racing series, Penske is involved in some form. They're in NASCAR in both the Cup Series, the Truck Series. They are involved in IMSA in multiple ways. They are very much involved in IndyCar in multiple ways, in both the fact that they do have Team Penske, but then they also have the complete separate entity that is also Penske Entertainment. That is something that is important to note, that those are two different entities that run it. Penske Entertainment is the one that is in charge of IndyCar, the Indy 500, and IMS. And go back to the history episode if you want to kind of look at what does that kind of dynamic look like. But we were talking about Team Penske, which is the IndyCar sector of Penske Motorsport. With this one, it is owned by Roger Penske, as the name might suggest, who is also the owner of the series. With this, going back to the idea of technical partnerships and what that could really lead to, they do have a technical partnership with AJ Foyt Racing for the last couple of years. They have been on the grid since 1968. So they debuted in the 1968 Indy 500, which is just really a testament. They have been around forever. Another one of our Chevy-powered cars. With this one, they have 15 championship victories and then 20 Indy 500 wins. Some of the more notable drivers, not including the three they currently have, include Emerson Fittipaldi when he came over from Europe, Paul Tracy, Jan Magnussen, Kevin Magnussen's dad, so, familiar name there. He raced for them just one race, but he did race for them. Helio Castroneves and Simon Pagenaud. So those are some of the notable drivers. There's plenty more. But then you have the three that they have currently, which are also love them, hate them, feel indifferent towards them. All three of them are very big names in the sport, and I think very important to why the sport looks kind of like what it does. So first, in the number 2 car, you have Joseph Newgarden. He is 34 years old from Hendersonville, Tennessee, which is outside of Nashville. This is his 13th year in the series. As I mentioned earlier, he did debut in 2012 with Sarah Fisher Hartman Racing, which would then become ECR. He moved to Penske in 2017. We've kind of talked about this. I don't know if it's actually made the podcast or not, but we have kind of talked about this in the idea of you have Joseph Newgarden, Mr. Penske Perfect race car driver, and then you just have Joseph. And I don't know if we're going to spend time discussing the nuance of that one, but I do think it's one where Joseph can be very prickly. He can be very polarizing to people. And I think it's one where, especially last year, after everything that kind of happened in St. Pete and pushed to pass gate and everything, he kind of became the villain in a lot of people's eyes. Whether that is an accurate description or not, I think is very much left up to an individual. He is one where I wasn't necessarily, sold on him at the beginning. And I've kind of come around more to like kind of appreciate Joseph Newgarden for the fact that like he kind of leaned in to the fact that like IndyCar needed a villain. And he said, okay, I can do that. And good, bad, and different, it kind of is where we're at with that. He was also one of the 3 drivers featured on the Indy on Fox commercials, which was another really good one. It's the first one that we got to really kick off what are we expecting this new era of IndyCar.
Tom Brady was in his commercial, that's all.
Yes, that is also true.
I'm so sorry. I had to say it. So in my mind, it's not Joseph Newgarden's commercial, it's Tom Brady's featuring Joseph Newgarden.
Anyways, so Joseph has had 31 wins, 58 podiums, and 18 poles across his extended IndyCar career. With that, he won the 2017 and the 2019 championship. And more recently, he has gone back-to-back 500 wins. With this, he does have the chance to make it a three-peat in this upcoming year, which would be one of 2 drivers to ever have that possibility, to ever even be a thing. And it's been a very long time since that happened. So regardless of how you feel, and I'm sure we'll discuss it come May, that could potentially be an interesting thing to watch as we get closer to the 500. He is historically kind of known as the king of short ovals. However, we did see that last year, every time I would mention that, he would go on to not have a good race on the short ovals. So I don't know, take that with a grain of salt. He also I jokingly refer to him as like a life-size action figure, because if you look at like, this man, it looks like you just took him out of like a box from the toy aisle, which kind of goes along with the fact that his wife is an actual Disney princess. And like, I'm not just saying that, oh, Ashley Newgarden looks like a princess. Like, no, she's an actual Disney princess. They met when she was playing Ariel at Disney. So they have a really cute love story. And they have a little boy named Coda, who is the cutest little blonde boy I think I've ever seen. And that's Joseph Newgarden in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think he definitely is very, like you said, polarizing and kind of like abrasive. But, I feel like we need to mention the Bus Bros, which I know you're going to talk about the other half of the Bus Bros in a second. But I feel like that whole situation and like the Bus Bros with like Scott McLaughlin, like I feel like they like that whole situation and the downfall of that really fed into people's dislike of him. And then you also go into the push to pass gate and all of that. And, then you get the back-to-back Indy 500 wins, which if you're a fan of him is great. If you're not a fan of him, also is just kind of like, oh my God, seriously. So it's very polarizing for how he is perceived. But like you mentioned, there's Joseph Newgarden, the racing driver, and then just Joseph. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that there is that difference. So hopefully we get to see a little bit more of Joseph, the guy, and less of like the IndyCar villain. Because with him having the 500 wins, he also wrote a children's book. And elementary school teacher in me, I'm like kind of obsessed with it. It's a great book, actually. And as much as Alex Palou's child didn't like the book, which if you haven't seen his Indy on Fox commercial, that's not going to make sense. But it is a very wonderful book, and he does do a lot of very good things with that kind of scene. So hopefully we get less of Mr. Penske Perfect and a little bit more of like actual Joseph.
Joseph Newgarden, theater kid. A lot more fun.
Yes, and maybe like also Joseph Newgarden, like wedding guest, because apparently he's so fun at weddings. I don't know. I think that would be cool.
All right, going to Scotty Mack, Scott McLaughlin, and the Thirsty Threes, the other half of the Bus Bros. Meg mentioned the Bus Bros. I guess since we are doing this, for those who may not be familiar with IndyCar, we need to touch on what the Bus Bros were. So when Scott McLaughlin came to Penske in 2020, or came to the IndyCar side of Penske, I'll touch on that in a minute because I wasn't actually really aware of that as well, but came to IndyCar Penske in 2021, he and Joseph really started this YouTube series called the Bus Bros. It lasted through the 21 and 22 season. Really, they were known kind of as this duo. And then there's probably a lot more behind the scenes that we are not ever going to be privy to unless one of them decides to write a tell-all book down the road. But end all be all is Joseph felt like him focusing on those relationships kind of took away from his driving, and he really wanted to focus on being that whole idea of Mr. Penske perfect. And their friendship really kind of blew up. Push to Pass Gate in St. Pete probably did play a role in that and how all of that was handled. We are not going to spend the time on that today. If anyone is interested, I guess we can cover that as we preview St. Pete a little bit because it does relate to last year. But for today, we're not going to spend the time on that one. But that was kind of a lot of the world's introduction to Scott McLaughlin in the terms of IndyCar was as a bus pro. So Scott McLaughlin, Scotty Mac, is a New Zealander. He is 31 years old. This is going to be his 5th year in IndyCar. With this, he came to us from Australia racing in supercars. He raced with Team Penske there in supercars. So again, Penske involved in everything in motorsport, I swear. With this, something that's very interesting is Tim Cindric, who is the kind of head of the IndyCar side of Team Penske, who news report thing, we'll touch on this going into our St. Pete preview too, but Tim Cindric is also stepping down or stepping back from his day-to-day duties as head of Team Penske IndyCar. But he didn't want Scott to come to IndyCar. But when he actually went out there and watched him race, he was like, oh no, we need to bring this guy over. And with that, I think Scott's done a really good job of proving that he very much deserves to be in IndyCar. And, going into his 4th year, he was fighting up until that last race to have a chance for that championship title. With that, he's had 7 wins. He's done it across all 3 types of track too. He's had 19 podiums. He's had 9 poles associated with this one. And, he said it himself when he won his first oval last year that now he feels like he can call himself an IndyCar driver because he's gotten those wins on all 3 circuit types. He also had a baby in October. We've talked about Lucy McLaughlin and how adorable she is too, but I'll mention that as well because we've been hitting on some of the drivers kind of off-season news stuff, but I don't know. I like Scotty Mac. He seems fun. He's very silly on Twitter. I recommend following him, or X or whatever. It's Twitter.
Whatever it's called. He's very fun, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention how much Megan loves his meat wagon, like the car. So, we love Scotty Mac in this house. He's great. And Tim Cindric, I hope you bit your tongue on that because he's been fantastic for you. So, love to see it.
Then the last member of Team Penske is Mr. William Power. He in the number 12 Verizon Chevy car. So Will Power is 43 years old. He will turn 44 on the Saturday of St. Pete, so March 1st. So happy almost birthday, Will Power. He is from Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia. He's probably the only non-American driver who I listed where he's from, just because Toowoomba is fun to say. He is going into his 18th season in IndyCar. So man has been around for a hot minute. He was the 2006 Rookie of the Year. He did debut before that in 2005, but that was kind of that weird kind of champ car from kart era, so everything was a little funky at that point. 2009 is when he came to Penske, and he's been a Penske driver ever since then. He has had 2 championship wins in 2014 and 2022. He also won the 2018 Indy 500. I lovingly wrote in the notes that he's kind of crazy in the best way, and that willpower, what a man. That's what I got. It's just the memes he gives, the comments he says, him almost fighting the reporter last year in pit lane because he was angry and then apologized for it after. That sums him up a lot. It's just he's known to flip off his teammates when they piss him off. With that too, fun story about him personally. I think it's really sweet in a way. So when he first came to the US, the team that he was in, it wasn't with Penske yet, the team that he was racing with, he came through, he, like I said, is kind of crazy in the best way, and apparently, was really struggling to kind of get to know people. His wife was working in their office at that point, and their boss went to her and was just like, hey, can you hang out with him, maybe introduce him to some people during that time? And so Liz at that point also kind of realized oh, he's cute and I kind of want to date him, but I can't do this because of my job. Well, that didn't really work out. And they ended up, dating, married. They have a little boy, Bo, who is 5 now. So that just, I think, is a cute story of essentially Liz was like, you know what, the HR violation's worth it.
So true. They're so sweet together too. Anytime you see them on pit lane, it's very wholesome, which is hilarious as a counterpoint to how crazy Will is. And I think it's a perfect duo. I think they're great.
I think also with that, it is important to note that he almost did quit racing a couple years ago when she was really, really, really sick and they didn't know what was going on. And it says a testament to him and how much his family means that he was going to give up, what he had been doing his whole life for his wife and to be there for his son. And he got his first win last year for the first time in 2 years, which when you've been in the series this long, that's a big deal.
Yeah, we love the comeback of Willpower. And he was also in that crazy title fight that came down to the last race last year and had a very disappointing end
Dang
to it.
seatbelts.
Seatbelts. We say in parentheses asterisk, no, we really freaking love those seatbelts, but my God.
They failed. I didn't love his seatbelts that day.
No, that's what I'm saying. In general, we do love those seatbelts, but his failed, and that was the reason why he was then out of contention of the championship title fight. But I don't know. I have a good feeling that coming off of that, he's gonna have a little bit of a fire under his to prove a point again and really put his name back up at the top. And you know what? I'm here for that. I'm here for that return for Willpower. So we're going to move on to Arrow McLaren next, which if you've listened to any episode of the podcast, you will know that I am a fan of McLaren. Fan being an interesting word here, but going into the history of it. So for the first time, the team is fully owned by McLaren Racing as of January 2025. Originally, it was founded by Sam Schmidt in 2001 as Sam Schmidt Motorsport. Arrow became the title sponsor in 2019, and then McLaren bought 75% stake in 2020. And then, like I said, it is now fully owned by McLaren Racing. We have a lot of notable drivers that have come through Arrow in the past several years. So we have Townsend Bell, we have Simon Pagenaud, Jack Harvey, Marcus Ericsson, Alexander Rossi, Felix Rosenquist, and James Hinchcliffe. If you were following the 2024 season at all, you have learned about the saga of the number 6 car. So there was a lot of drama that was surrounding the number 6. So Felix Rosenquist was in the number 6 car originally, and Alex Palou was supposed to come in and be in that number 6 for that season. But like I mentioned before, there's the whole controversy that happened between McLaren and Palou. But since that didn't work out, originally what they had was they had David Malukas signed for the number 6. David Malukas during the offseason had a wrist injury that prevented him from racing for the first couple of races of the season. And so they had to do a whole rotation of Callum Ilott, Theo Pourchaire, and Nolan Siegel. And it was basically just a revolving door, and we didn't really know who was doing what for the longest time. And I guess rumor has it, I'm not 100% sure how true this is, but rumor has it that in David Malukas's contract that he couldn't miss more than like 4 races, and because his injury was more extensive than originally thought, he was going to miss more than those 4 races. So they ended up having to let him go so that they could have someone come in and be a more permanent driver for that number 6, which is where we got Nolan Siegel coming in at the end of the season to kind of finish it out. So that brings us into our driver lineup for McLaren, and I'll start with the number 6. So we'll have Nolan Siegel, who's going to continue in that car for the rest of the season. He is 20 years old from California. He raced in 12 races last season in a whole lot, like I mentioned. We said that he was in the Indy 500 last year, kind of debuting. And you know what? If you go back and actually listen to our first episode where we talked about the 500, I believe I mentioned that Nolan is a pretty good driver. And I was thoroughly impressed with what he was doing during the 500 on like qualifying day, and he crashed out. There's no way to put it other than that. He just crashed out. But the quote that sticks with me was that he was saying something along the lines of, well, I wasn't going to go home because I lifted. And, I think that speaks very highly of him as a driver. He has a very strong mentality of like, I'm just going to full send it because I'm not going to go home for being cautious. So I'm interested to see what will happen during the 500 this year. He's going to be one that I really kind of pay attention to. But this is going to be his first full season. So we're excited about what he's going to do in the number 6 car. Then we have in the number 7 car, Christian Lundgaard. So he's 23 years old from Denmark, and he came from F1 Feeder Series. So he was actually a Renault Academy driver, and he debuted in 2021 with RLL, and his first full season was 2022. He is switching to McLaren this year after getting one win in 2023, which was in Toronto, and I loved that race. So I loved that race because he made a bet with his best friend in the off season that he had to sport like a mustache until he got his first win. And he started on pole that race. He had passed Alex Palou with, a handful of laps left, and he ended up winning. And the best part about it was that his best friend was actually in Toronto for the win, and they were both crying, and it was fantastic. And then he shaved his mustache live on camera. It was fantastic. Anyways, so he has that one win under his belt. He's got 3 podiums and 2 pole positions as well. So I'm excited for what Christian Lundgaard has for Aero. We'll see what happens. Hopefully he's able to produce again. And then finally, the last driver in the McLaren lineup is Pato O'Ward in the number 5 car. So he's 25 years old from Monterrey, Mexico, and he did grow up kind of in Texas as well, so he often will be in Texas and says that's like it's very close to home for him. This is going to be his 8th season in the sport, so he's been around for a handful of years. He was the 2018 Indy Lights champion with Andretti, and he debuted in 2018 in IndyCar with Hardin Racing, and then did a part-time stint with Carlin in 2019 where he did 13 races. 2019 also saw a very interesting kind of shift for him in terms of where he was going. So he signed to the Red Bull Junior team in 2019 as well, and was placed on like a 1-event deal to compete at Red Bull Ring in Formula 2. But unfortunately, due to FIA being the FIA, they decided to award less super license points for Indy Lights championships. So that meant that he wasn't able to attain the required points in order to race in F1 in 2020, where he was supposed to be with Red Bull, but they dropped him essentially in 2020. That is when he realized that, okay, he's going to go to McLaren now in 2020 as a full-time driver. He in total has 7 wins, 26 podiums, 5 pole positions, and 2 second place finishes at the 500. And he is McLaren's Formula One reserve driver as well. So that is Aero McLaren. And moving on to Andretti, unless you have something else.
No, I think this is going to be a very interesting year for McLaren overall in the name of them as an IndyCar team, because this is their 5th year in the sport. And I think when we've seen that in the last few years, it's been CGR or Penske really at the top of everything. And this is not a dig at McLaren by any means, but I think this is kind of going to be one of those of either show up or, like get off the pot sort of thing. Like,
yeah, it's going to be interesting because so I feel like they have been kind of coming up for a handful of years, and this is, like you said, it's like the make or break season to like kind of cement themselves as a top marker team. Like we're constantly talking about, the potential that McLaren has, why aren't they producing a lot more? But I think something else of note to mention is that they have one of the most kind of like high tech like facilities, and they also do very equitable pay. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I wonder if, since McLaren Racing has full ownership of the team, if that's going to change anything. But who really knows? I mean, it's interesting because Zach Brown, who's the CEO of McLaren, he is fully into Formula One, and like that's kind of his baby and his project. And I feel like this is just kind of like something that he does with Indy. So I'm like, I don't know. So when I say I'm a McLaren fan, I'm a McLaren driver fan, not necessarily the McLaren team. Because it's so interesting, and you never really know what you're going to get with the team.
go listen to last season if you want my feelings on Aero McLaren. Andretti IndyCar, Andretti Global. the Andretti team, it's Cadillac Motorsports, whatever you want to call them these days, similarly to Penske, has their hands in everything. It's, you name a series, they are there. And even maybe more so than Penske, where Penske is pretty much to North America, we're about to see Andretti, mind you, under a different name, but Andretti starting to expand even more so too. With this, the Andretti team has 5 championships. They have 6 Indy 500 victories. They were founded in 1993, so again, one of these teams has been around for a long time as the Foresight Green Racing, and then in 2002 began running as Andretti Green Racing. So Andretti Green Racing is really kind of a very notable name in the sport under that title and for the drivers they had at that time and the team they put together. That's when Michael Andretti, that is, bought shares and was able to actually bring it into Andretti Motorsport at that point. Touched on this already, and we're not going to spend the time on it, but Michael will not be part of the team ownership going forward. Still probably be there. He still is Michael Andretti. Same way that, Mario Andretti isn't just going to disappear, but it's going to be in a very different capacity than it has been previously. Notable drivers they have, so talk about the Andretti Green. You have Dario Franchitti, you have Tony Kanaan, Ryan Herta, who is still part of the team. Mind you, it's now in a different capacity. Marco Andretti still will race with them. We'll talk about Marco 500 time. Danica Patrick was part with them. Ryan Hunter-Reay was with them for years. James Hinchcliffe was able to stay in the sport of IndyCar because of the chance that Andretti gave them. Alexander Rossi was with them for years. Devlin DeFrancesco, we'll touch on later, was there for a brief kind of time. And then, again, another team that has featured notable time with Jack Harvey. So with that, going into their current lineup, 3 drivers this year, all have been there for at least a year. So that's going to be nice to see kind of what they do as a more kind of consistent unit. First, you're going to have Colton Herta. This is Brian Herta's son. This child has grown up literally from the time that he was 2 weeks old being at a racetrack. So, it could be one where you could sit here and say, oh, Colton Herta may be the Nepo baby of Nepo babies of the sport because he has known this Andretti family since he was literally a newborn, far as you can get from being true, I think, too. So Colton is 24 years old from California. He has moved through very quickly and has gotten a lot of opportunities kind of granted to him because he has probably some of the most raw talent on the grid. With this, he has had 9 wins. He has had 18 podiums and 14 poles. He was the youngest ever pole sitter at Road America in 2019. He debuted with Hardin Racing in 2019, so he spent 2 years with them before he moved to Andretti in 2021. With that, too, he finished second last year in the overall standings, which is his highest finish to date. He's had the chance to go to F1, but much like Pato Award, super license points have not been there because the FIA refuses to give IndyCar the credit that it deserves. He's 40-ish points away, so the opportunity for him to get that super license very much exists in this upcoming year, which means there is very much a opportunity for him to potentially have the move to that Cadillac F1 seat if he wants it and the timing works out. But Colton very much loves IndyCar and wants to be part of IndyCar. I think he's going to be a big one to watch going into this next season. Okay, next driver in the Andretti lineup is, I will fully say, my favorite driver on the grid, Cal Kirkwood. He is 26 years old from Jupiter, Florida. I talked about Colton having raw talent and everything that he's done, but by God, I don't think anyone statistically has been better on the road to Indy than Kyle Kirkwood. When I say that he won everything, that is not an exaggeration. Like, he won everything in every category he raced in until he got into Indy. He was the Indy Lights champion with Andretti. With that, timing didn't really work out for there to be a seat when he was moving up. So 2022, he spent his rookie season in the number 14 AJ Foyt car. But they were able to, when Rossi left to go to McLaren, they brought Kyle from that to in 2023. He's had 2 wins. He's had 3 podiums. He's had 2 poles during that time. With that, Brian Herta, Colton's dad, is actually his strategist. So that's a really interesting lineup too. And sadly, we've already touched on we are losing Pete Carr. Positively, we're getting the Chili's mobile in 3 weeks, y'all. Like, let's go. And then the last driver for Andretti is Marcus Ericsson in the number 28. It's another one that's switching kind of brand sponsor, so that livery will look a little bit different for this upcoming year. But he is 34 years old from Sweden. He's had 4 wins, 11 podiums. He has had no pole positions, which I thought was interesting. So last year was his first year with Andretti. Previously, he was a CGR driver from 2020 till 2023, and with that won the 2022 Indy 500. He also is formerly an F1 driver with the Sauber Academy, so he spent quite a good chunk of time actually with F1 and over there before making the leap to IndyCar. I think Marcus, it'll be interesting to see because it kind of seemed like he had a hard time last year switching teams from CGR to Andretti to what that might look like for him going into this upcoming year. Okay, so that's Andretti kind of in a nutshell. I think they kind of are in the same boat as McLaren, honestly, of like, will this be a return of Andretti and the notable name that is Andretti Racing in IndyCar, where it's, I think we've kind of can have it as like, it's been kind of a tier list of it's Chip Ganassi and Penske up top, and then right below is Andretti and McLaren, and then you got everyone else kind of falling below that. I think Colton showed that it's very much there. I think Kyle, with his consistency last year, showed it was very much there. But what will that turn into this year? I think is, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting because last year, a lot of what prevented Andretti, specifically Kyle and Colton, like what prevented them from returning to the top at a more consistent basis was just unfortunate, like cautions and just bad luck. And like we talked about it on the podcast, like very regularly, like when we were doing like race recaps and previews and stuff, like ill-timed caution flags or just like random things that would happen that are out of their control, because there were so many races that Colton and Kyle were just kind of like dominating from the start, and then just like one thing would happen and it was like, all right, game over for them. And so I know that it was like super frustrating for them to constantly be feeling like that, but like you said, like they have been very consistent very regularly, minus Marcus, which is going to be, which you touched on. So I don't know. I think the kind of competition between McLaren and Andretti is going to be a very interesting one for this upcoming season.
Definitely. All right, home stretch. Last two teams to talk about. The team that has been in IndyCar the longest of any of them is our next one to talk about with AJ Foyt Racing. AJ Foyt Racing debuted in 1965. With that, they have 5 championships, 3 Indy 500s. They're a Chevy partner team, and then do have that technical partnership with Team Penske. I'm going to touch on that in a minute as far as how that looks in comparison to that MSR partnership and something, Meg, that you said earlier. Notable drivers associated with the team: AJ Foyt, of course, he has won 7 championships. No one's done it more than the man, that the legend that is AJ Foyt. Ryan Hurta's rookie season was with them. Chip Ganassi raced with AJ Foyt Racing for a minute. Ryan Hunter-Reay was there for a minute. Connor Daly's rookie season, Kyle Kirkwood's rookie season. Stingray Robb was there last year as well. So a few drivers that you still are going to see were a part of that. As far as this year, they have 2 drivers, 1 returning, 1 new to the team. First in the number 4 car, so they are actually having a number change from last year to this year. They're going to be racing in the number 4 car with David Malukas. We touched on David in a few different capacities now, but David Malukas is 23 years old from Chicago. This is his 4th season in the sport. He spent 2 years with DCR in a partnership with HMD Motorsport, which is part of his parents running, and they run HMD Motorsports in Indy NXT as well. With that, too, you have the whole McLaren saga that Meg touched on, and what woulda, coulda, shoulda been, and just wasn't because man broke his wrist, which led to him taking some pretty considerable, about half the season off last year, and then ending up in MSR at the last half. Really did well there. Man has had 2 podiums across his career. Definitely, like, he is a meme lord. Good, bad, however you want to take that. He is a meme lord. He's a 23-year-old weirdo, but we love him so very, very much. I think, and this goes to, while I wanted to talk about that technical partnership, it has very much been rumored, and I mean heavily rumored to the extent that Will Power was directly asked about it on Media Day, which still doesn't sit well with me, to be quite honest. But it is expected that when Will Power either is not renewed for next year, because Will Power is under contract renewals for this upcoming, for the 2026 season, whether it's Will Power is not renewed in his contract with Team Penske or that Will Power decides to retire, it is expected that David Malukas, and part of why this partnership that led to him going to AJ Foyt, is to land him that Penske seat. And so Meg talked about how like sometimes those technical alliances could serve as a way to get young drivers ready to move up, or young mechanics or members of the team ready to move up. I think this is what we're seeing here. Now, that is heavy, 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 heavy speculation. So, not saying that we know this for fact, not saying we have any inside sources. I am fully just going off what we can see. And like I said, it does not sit well with me that journalists, like, were asking Will Power about this on Media Day. But that is the reality of just, like, this is something we can see, and it's being talked about enough that there's got to be at least some fact behind these rumors. David's good. David's a very fast driver. He's a very quick driver. So I think, it would make sense if Penske's wanting to get their next one in, then give them this year with AJ Foyt or a year or two with AJ Foyt to be able to line that up so he can move into them. And going with that, talking about fast drivers and good drivers, quite honestly, is the number 14 driver, Santino Ferrucci. Santino is 26 years old. He's from Connecticut. He debuted for 2 races with DCR in 2018, first full season in 2019. However, he only ran the 500 in 21 and 22. He's had 1 podium, 1 pole. I'll take the Connor Daly approach and leave it at I don't necessarily agree with some of the things that Santino Ferrucci says and some of the actions that he does, but I will say that he is a good driver. And that is all I'm going to say about Santino Ferrucci.
Yeah, I mean, along the same lines, not really going to comment, but he is notably wicked fast on ovals. So he's constantly one that we need to keep an eye on at the 500 and any oval course, really. Like, you'll constantly see him pulling moves that are very risky, but have a very high payoff. And so it's interesting to watch, but he is wickedly fast on ovals. So leaving it there.
Yep. All right. And our last team that we are going to talk about is Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing.
Yes. Also known as RLL, because saying all of those names is a lot sometimes. So they debuted in 1992. They are our Honda engine, and they are owned by Bobby Rahal, David Letterman, and Mike Lanigan. They returned to being a full-time team in 2012 with their notable drivers. You've heard these names literally all episode. You have Bobby Rahal, Brian Herta, Danica Patrick, Graham Rahal, Jack Harvey, Christian Lundgaard, and Santino Ferrucci. So they have a lot of names, and that leads us into our current lineup. So we have Graham Rahal, who is in the number 15 car, 36 years old, from Ohio. It is his 18th year in the series. He has 6 wins, 29 podiums, and 5 poles. So he's got some pretty good stats there for him. And he's been with RLL since 2013. I mean, his dad is Bobby Rahal.
Yes. So that is important to note that Graham is racing for his father's team, but I didn't put that in here. But I do think it's interesting to say, and why you've heard Graham mention with other teams, is that his dad very much had a team. Team Rahal existed when Graham started racing. He has not always raced for his dad's team. Actually, for probably the first, third of his career, Bobby said, no, not yet. Which I think is honestly a testament to the fact that Bobby Rahal does care about having a winning product and a winning team, and didn't just bring in Graham to be a driver to be a driver.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and fun fact, he owns a car dealership. So I think that's very interesting. So then we're going to go into the number 30 car of Devlin DeFrancesco. He's 25 years old from Canada. He was in the series before in 2022 and 23, where he drove for Andretti. He didn't have a seat last season, but he is returning now. He does also come from a lot of money. So that's why he's being put back into this seat. But, I didn't really... This sounds terrible to say, but I didn't really pay attention to Devlin too much when he was in the series, so I can't really speak to his driver performance. So I'm interested to see what he's actually capable of doing with RLL. So he's going to be one that I watch as well. So that brings us to our last car, the number 45, with Louis Foster, who is 21 years old from England. He is the 2024 Indy Next champion, and he's the 3rd and final rookie for the 2025 season. I really enjoyed watching him when I did get the chance to see the Indy Next series. I thought he was very, very fast. So I'm excited to see what he comes up with as well. But since he's a rookie and I don't really know him that well, that's all we really got for him. So that brings us to the end of our team and driver breakdown. That was a lot. So if you're stuck with us this long, props to you. Golf claps.
Yeah, so that concludes all 11 teams. I am going to make a note to anyone who's saying, wait, what about Dreyer Reinbold? Well, They are a 500 only team as of right now. So they will be racing with Jack Harvey and Ryan Hunter-Reay. So along with them, and then the other 500 entries such as Helio Castroneves, Marco Andretti, and Ed Carpenter, we will discuss them when we are spending time actually talking about the 500 because none of them are going to be full-time entries. So not the point of today's episode. But I think that brings us to the end. Like Mike said, for those who stuck around, thank you. We appreciate it immensely. Next week, St. Pete preview, because y'all, it's going to be that time. You're going to be listening to it, and we're going to be a day from Cars on Track.
We're so close, guys.
All right. As always, follow us on all our social medias, Instagram and TikTok, Racing Thoughts Podcast, on Twitter at Racing One Thoughts. Shout out to our new social media content and everything that Cass has been doing there. It's great work, and we are so appreciative beyond words for everything that's been happening on that front. If you like the rebrand, it wasn't us, and we owe a lot to our friend Cass and everything that's been happening with that. But I think that's it.
I think that brings us to the very end. All right. See you later. Bye.
Bye.